He was called to do maintenance work at a residence, but when he got there he had a big surprise involving his wife. Someone knocks on the door and the owner of the house goes to answer it. When opening the door, the plumber is there to make a repair on a broken pipe. The owner of the house says yes, asking him to come in. He then enters and then asks where the leak is. The owner then informs him that it is in the bathroom and takes him there. He then takes his phone out of his pocket to start working. But first he looks at the time on the clock, and to the surprise of the two, when opening the phone screen, the owner of the house asks where he knows that woman from. The boy then says it's his wife, but the owner of the house doesn't believe it and shows a picture of her with him on his cell phone too, and the two stand there in disbelief at what they're seeing and outraged at what might be happening to them that day. Time. Neither one of them wants to believe what she is doing to them, and so the husband says that if he agrees he has an idea. And the owner of the house then asks what the idea would be, and he then talks and the two agree and plan everything. She comes home calling for him at that moment, and he is there on the couch waiting for her. She approaches all happy, wanting to know how he is, and goes right away kissing him and sits there next to her. He then asks her how her day was, and she says it went well, and then she wants to know how his day was, and he says it went well and that he did a job, and at that moment she says she has an appointment and asks him the hours. She then takes his cell phone to check the time, and when he opens it, he is surprised to see the photo of the other with her on his cell phone and asks what that means, and he then says that it is the photo of the two of them and that she doesn't recognize him anymore. She says no and starts messing with her hair and says she needs to get some air and leaves. Meanwhile, her husband calls the other boy who was inside the room, and he arrives all excited because he saw her reaction, and then he leaves him there in the living room sitting on the couch in the same place where he was when she arrived, and goes to the room. She then enters again, saying that she took a breath and thought she was crazy and seeing things, but that now she was already clear, and then when she turns to face her lover and gets scared, and he then asks why she is scared, being that she had left at that moment from there. She then says she's going to be crazy and starts to move around the room and then sits down and says she's crazy. He then says he doesn't understand why she says she's crazy and asks her how was her day. She then says that she worked a lot and asks him what he did, so he says that he spent the day at home and that he didn't do anything, and then says that he is waiting to give the schedule of an appointment he has, and at that moment asks her to look at the hours on your cell phone, because you can't see it properly. She then takes his cell phone and asks what is that on his cell phone, and he says he just wants to know the time, and says she's going crazy and that she doesn't understand anything. She then says she's talking about the photo and wants to know that picture is that one, and he says there's nothing wrong and it's just the picture of them. She then says she's going to go crazy and gets up and leaves. He stands there smiling while the other leaves the room, clapping his hands and smiling, and says that everything went well and that she felt like a paw. Meanwhile, she, without understanding anything, is left to wonder what is happening to her and that she can't anymore. Wondering where she is and not knowing what to do, she starts to panic. She then comes back and her husband is sitting at the table with the other boy, and she goes in and asks what is happening to her, and he calls her and she remains there in the hallway in agony. He then says he wants to introduce his friend. She hugs him and says he's not okay. He then says that he wants her to meet his friend, but when he turns around she is surprised and walks away, but the boy greets her pretending to have never seen him, and says that her husband spoke very well of her. She then, all embarrassed, says yeah, he spoke well, and then her husband asks her why she is like that and invites her to sit there with them. She turns around and sits next to her. She apologizes because she is not feeling well at that moment and that her head is really bugged and that she is not able to reason. The boy at that moment then tells her to calm down and says what she needs is to drink water and asks her husband to get water for her, and he gets up and the two of them are alone at the table. She then tells him to stop with that cute at that moment, and he, pretending that he didn't understand anything, says he doesn't even know her and that he just met her at that moment. She then says that they won't drive her crazy and that they really won't, but he keeps saying that she's confusing him with someone else and that she doesn't understand, but she goes on and says she's not confusing him, and that when you get home they will talk. He says home, talk, and at that moment the husband comes in with a glass of water for her, putting it on the table, and she thanks him and starts drinking. He then says that she is very weird and that he doesn't know what happened to her. The boy then says he's leaving and that he'd better go. He says goodbye and leaves. Then her husband wants to know what happened and why her friend decided to leave so fast. She then says that she doesn't know and that she is not well at all, and gets up and goes to her room. The next day when she comes home, she goes to open the door, but her key doesn't work. She tries to open it, but she can't, and without understanding what is happening, the doorbell rings and a woman opens the door and she wants to know who it's her, but the woman says that she does want to know who she is. She then says that the house is hers and asks for her husband, calling him, but the woman says that the house is hers and her husband's and calls him. He arrives and wants to know what is happening there, and she says that her girl is saying that the house is hers and that he is her husband. He then asks who she is and what she needs to get out of her house. She continues to say that she is his wife. He then says that he has been married to his wife for 5 years and that he doesn't even know who she is. The woman then says that if she doesn't get out of there, she will call the police and tell her to leave and close the door. And she, without understanding anything, stands there thinking about what is happening and is outraged by all that and leaves, saying that she was replaced by another. So she returns to the apartment and finds her lover with the same woman at the door, and the woman soon says it's her again in her house, but she wants to know what that woman is doing there with him and asks him who she is. And he then says he wants to know who she is and says that woman over there is his wife and that they've been together for 4 years. She then says that she's going to go crazy, while the other asks him to get her out of there. He then asks her politely to leave her house, otherwise she'll have to call the police, and that nobody knows her there and please leave, and so he closes the door. She stands outside there not knowing what's going on with her and what she's doing. She's going crazy, and that before it was one and now the other. But it won't stay that way, and then she comes back and enters a once in the apartment. When opening the door and entering, she finds the 3 there in front of her, so the woman says that she won't give up anyway, and the 2 are outraged by her attitude, but she then says that they are all against her. Her lover then says that it's enough and that the game is over, that they found out what she was doing with the 2 of them, and that they already know what kind of woman she is, and that for him it's enough and that's it. Her husband also says that it's enough and that everything is over, so the woman who was there with him says that it's done and that it's over and gives her a suitcase with her things, but she says that she doesn't love them and that she can do without them. She then tells her husband that she loves him and he tells her to leave there, and then asks her lover if he is going to leave her and that he is the love of her life, and he then asks her to leave, in which the woman tells her to get out of there at that moment, and the 2 of them put her out and close the door, and she leaves regretting what she did with her life and that she lost the 2 loves of her life.